Just give people time to come in. I know we're expecting a few more cousins. All right, I think we can start the service. Thank you again for Barbara for the prayer. My name's, for those of us that aren't here, my name's William Jade Holt. I'm Dean's youngest, and I'm here to talk about what we've got planned today. We'll hear from Joe first, and we'll be hearing from Golden. And I will be pretty brief, but I'd like to also say thank you to Ashley for all the effort that she's put into these preparations. She's representing more than just Golden and Amanda and me, and that's not easy. We're strong-willed and passionate, just like our aunts and uncles, and I think that Dad would say, "Good job, Ashley." And he was always calm and rational, probably 99% of the time. And I miss him. And I've been heartbroken since he had his tumor removed. And I'm glad that he can move on. And that's all I have. Like I said, I'll be very brief. I'll turn it over to Joe.
It is an absolute honor to be asked to make a few comments and speak at these services for my older brother. I've had a couple of people ask me questions about this picture that's on the back of the program. And I'll get to it a little bit later in my talk, but this particular picture was taken at Williams Field in just outside of Chandler, Arizona. It was the second jet trainer that Dean trained in. While he was there, he would actually learn to fly. If I remember correctly, the sequence was to start off in a Cessna 150 airplane, then move into a side-by-side jet trainer, and then move into this tandem one. He was there, if I recall, for 2 years in pilot's training. Three words come to mind when I think about my older brother. Motivation, commitment, and integrity. Dean lived his life in such a way that those words could pretty much define who he was. Dean was the third child born in my mom and dad's family, their third child, I being the fourth. Dean was born after Dad returned home from Europe, Second World War, where he was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge severely. In fact, Dad did not expect to survive the last night. In his history, he writes how as the sun went down, he thought he was going to freeze to death that January night in Belgium, and he did not expect to see the sun come up. So I think you can say that Dean and I were probably miracle child, lucky to even have a life. And because of Dad's service, he was extremely patriotic, and he passed that patriotism on to his children. Dean served in the Air Force, Alma served in the Navy, I served in the Army National Guard. Granted, there was a war going on in Vietnam at the time, but we all, and I think especially Dean, did it as much out of patriotism as any other motivation. Dean, and I know parents identify this, but Dean held a special place in our mother's heart. In fact, he held a special place in all of our hearts and our family. We just knew that Dean was a special person. Couldn't define why, we just knew that he was special. There was just something about him that set him apart from the rest of us. He was very intellectual. He loved technology and he loved gadgets. When I would be hoping to get a ball or a truck or some other toy for Christmas, I remember one year Dean's request was a chemistry set. Another year his request was an erector set. And he spent hours with those, practicing building stuff with his erector set and doing experiments with his chemistry set. And we weren't very old at the time. His love of gadgets, I remember one cold winter day in Enterprise, and I believe it was probably during Christmas break from school. We were up there helping our dad, and I don't know now if we were feeding cows or I just remember that we were outside and it was cold and blistery and snowy. And Dean had his coat on and he would put his hands in his coat and he would look at Alma and I and he would grin. And then he'd take his hands out and continue on. Well, we'll come to find out, Dean had two little hand warmers that were in a metal case, run on lighter fluid, had a flame, and inside of his pockets, inside of a little green velvety bag, were these two metal hand warmers. He couldn't have been much more than about 13 or 14 years old. Where they came from, how he got them, I have no idea. But Dean had them. He always had a gadget of some sort that he was trying out. And Alma and I, pretty lucky when Dean shared his hand warmers on that cold winter day. As my big brother Dean had a real influence on me. Things that he did when we were younger, I wanted to do. I wanted to be like my big brother. Alma and Dean played football for Dixie High School. When I got in high school, I played football. Dean played center on the football team. Therefore, I played center on the football team. Dean joined the track team, and I decided I was going to join the track team until I realized how fast I actually ran, and I didn't join the track team. Dean was my main motivation in learning to fly and getting my own pilot's license. And you can see that even as an adult, I wanted to be like my big brother. He was an amazing big brother and I loved him. In between stints in the Air Force, because he served his first tour of duty, then got out of the Air Force, lived here in Dixie area, over in Washington, I believe. I know he lived in Washington, I don't remember other residences. But at that time, he was also a civilian instructor pilot. He taught several men here in the Dixie area how to fly while he was running a potato plant in Enterprise. And when I had the privilege of flying with him, he was always the instructor pilot, teaching me how to be a better pilot, always concentrating on safety, always concentrating on following procedures that were laid out. Dean had a way of turning motivation into commitments and turning commitments into something better. When we were pretty young, Dean brought out the first chess set that I remember seeing. And he loved to play chess. And I don't remember how old I was. In grade school, I'm pretty sure. But Dean taught me how to play chess. But he did not give me the patience it takes to play chess with Dean, because he had a plan for every single move and a contingency for every move that you would make. And where I thought chess was just a glorified game of checkers, Dean took chess as what it was, and he would plan his strategies. I'd look at the chessboard, make my quick move, and then wait to see what happened. And Dean would look back at me, and he'd say something like, "Joe, I didn't expect you to do that." And then he would start planning his next strategies based on the move that I just made, which would give me time to walk around the block, take a nap or something. But it took forever to play a game of chess with Dean, and I just didn't have the patience, but he did, and he loved it. Motivation takes different forms. And a story about Dean that might help define motivation in general took place when Dean was probably in high school, I think is about the right time frame. Over at Dad and Howard Ranch, there was a trail and a loading chute just the old lower pond. Dad and Howard had corralled a neighbor's cow, Stray, and had put her in this corral and in this loading chute. And this cow was on the fight. And by being on the fight, I mean she was mean. She was bellowing, jumping, kicking, rearing up, trying to get out of this loading chute. And Dad and Howard were frantically sliding boards in the fence, literally trying to build a lid over this cow to keep her contained until the neighbor could come and load her and haul her back home. Well, they weren't quick enough, and this cow literally crawled out of this loading chute, up over the top of it and out. It is really hard to describe just how mean and dangerous this cow was at that point. But she took off and ran into a net wire fence that was on the east side of that property. And she fell down and became a little bit tangled. And if you ever worked cows with my dad, and you were assigned to watch the gate, you probably heard the phrase at some point, "Let her know you're there, let her know you're there," which is what Dad said and what Dean did. Dean went over to this cow that was somewhat tangled up at that point and let out kind of a muffled and waved his arms at her, which invited this cow at that point to jump up and charge Dean. If you think back to watching rodeos and rodeo clowns fighting mean bulls in the arena, you don't run from the bull, you outmaneuver it. You jog around, you jerk, you jump side to side or whatever, but you don't run from the animal. Well, evidently Dean didn't know how to be a rodeo clown, because he turned literally and run directly away from this cow, out through the brush, doing high hurdles with this cow literally on his tail, snarling, blowing slobbers literally down his back as he was doing high hurdles out through the brush. Interesting thing is, Dean won that race. The cow gave up. And Dad just shook his head in disbelief that a man on foot could outrun a cow. If there was a cowboy foot race record book, I think Dean would be in it. And then, as a side note, as a senior in high school, when Dean was on the track team, he participated in the Dixie Invitational track meet. Schools from all around southern Utah were invited to this invitational meet. And there was a young man from Cedar City by the name of Neil Roberts participated in that meet. Some of you may remember the name. He coached here at Dixie. He played 3 years of basketball at BYU and was an All-American. And in fact, if I remember correctly, he was named one of Sports Illustrated's Prep Athletes of the Year because he was such an outstanding all-around athlete. Neil run a particular race at that invitational track meet that Dean was always proud to let us know that he also participated in that same race alongside of Neil Roberts, Dean representing Dixie High School. Neil wound up winning that race. In fact, he set an invitational record for that particular event in that race. And we always teased Dean that there were probably two records set that day. One for the fastest and one for the slowest. But I look back and I think of motivation and I think, what would have happened if that race had been run and Dean had had a cow on his tail? I think there may have been a different winner. When you look at Dean's obituary, there is a lot of information in there about his accomplishments in the Air Force. Living in Phoenix, Luke Air Force Base is on the west side of Phoenix, just outside of Glendale, Arizona. Luke Air Force Base evidently has a fabrication shop as part of their detail. And Dean would come to Luke periodically to supervise the building of a particular simulator of the C-130 to be used in training of pilots at Little Rock Air Force Base where Dean was stationed. The reason Dean would come is because he had designed the simulator they were building. He designed it and the Air Force decided to build that simulator. Dean explained it to me this way. He said, it is a waste of time to take those pilots into a C-130 and then sit there and start to explain all of the gauges and switches and controls that are involved before you can start teaching them how to fly a C-130. So Dean designed a simulator where they could sit side by side in more of a classroom setting and teach and familiarize the potential pilots with exactly what to expect when they actually got in the airplane. They still use that simulator in Little Rock, and there's a plaque by that simulator that bears Dean's name and credits him for the design and building of that simulator. But that's the way Dean was. He was very meticulous. The Air Force tapped him to be part of an evaluating team to evaluate a transport that they were considering buying from, I don't remember where it was built. I think it was built in South America somewhere. But Dean was part of a team that was evaluating this transport plane to see if the Air Force ought to buy it or not. The Air Force had a lot of faith in Dean, a lot of faith. In fact, those of us that are old enough to remember, after the Vietnam War, the United States and Vietnam had a very hard relationship, almost hostile. And part of Vietnam's position was they would not give up the remains of the fallen American soldiers to the United States. They basically were holding them as hostage. My words, but that's the way it seems. Secret negotiations would go on behind the scenes, probably through other country mediaries or whatever, trying to arrange the release of the remains of these fallen soldiers to be repatriated back to the United States. And occasionally Hanoi would release a few of the remains. When Dean was in the Philippines, stationed at Clark Air Force Base, he and his crew were tapped to fly a secret mission to Hanoi and pick up the remains of some of the fallen soldiers and bring them back home. The Air Force had a lot of confidence in Dean being able to follow procedures, get the job done, and follow his commitments. They knew they could count on him. I remember Dean coming to Luke one time, and his assignment at the time was as a pilot evaluator for the Military Airlift Command, MAC, which basically controlled all of the transport aircraft in the U.S. Air Force, give or take, probably an overstatement. But as a pilot evaluator, Dean told me that he loved seeing the expression on a pilot's face when he would walk up to an aircraft, introduce himself to the pilot, and then inform him that he would be sitting in the extra seat in the cockpit and he'd be doing an evaluation that day. I remember one particular time, Dean called me, I think, from San Francisco and said, "I will be at Luke at such and such a time. Can you come and have lunch?" Sure. Any chance I got, I would buzz out to Luke and try and meet Dean. Well, the transport that day was a scheduled medical flight that flew around the western United States, transporting patients between military hospitals and finally winding up down in Texas somewhere. But I asked Dean, I said, "So You ride with the patients? How do you do it? He says, oh no. He said, when I got on the airplane, I showed him my identification, identified myself as a MAC evaluator, and informed the pilot that I would be doing an evaluation on this trip, and therefore he rode in the cockpit. He hated riding any place else in an airplane except the cockpit, and he wasn't afraid to do what he needed to do to ensure that he was there. In fact, it just reminds me, he flew one time from Las Vegas to St. George on SkyWest. And when he got here and landed, he says, I can't believe it. I said, what happened? He said, I can't believe that this SkyWest pilot got lost. He says, we were actually flying around the Enterprise Reservoir looking for the St. George Airport. And he said, I had to tell the pilot where we were so he could actually get back and land. I was lucky to have Dean as an older brother. I really was. Our dad was not real big on Boy Scouts. In fact, Dad told me one time, he said, Boy Scouts is for boys that don't have anything else to do, when I was wanting to go to a summer scout camp. Not that he was belittling scouting, it was just that we had things that needed to be done, and so that's what we were expected to do. Dean on his own attained the rank of Life Scout and was just a few merit badges away from becoming an Eagle Scout, all on his own. He didn't receive a lot of encouragement and help from family that most boys in scouting are able to get. When Mom was Washington County School lunch supervisor, Dean was her right-hand man, and he was getting school lunch supplies to the different kitchens. I remember many times after school, Mom taking Dean and going up to the storage building of the school, and they'd load supplies, and Dean would go with Mom, help Mom deliver school lunch supplies around the different schools. Dean run Dad's potato plant here in St. George after our grandfather was no longer able to do it. He would process the potatoes for Dad, and make the deliveries here in town, and then make the deliveries in Cedar City. Mom and Dad knew they could depend on Dean. When Barbara and Ralph moved to Stadium Village in the University of Utah, Dean and I were still in school. Dean was in high school and I was 2 years behind him. But Dad had no problem telling Dean to take that little bobtail with Barbara and Ralph's belongings and move them to Salt Lake. I was lucky and got to go along with him, but that was the kind of confidence Dad had. A couple of weeks before Dean went on his mission to Brazil, Dad needed a load of potatoes delivered to Phoenix, and again, he had no problem telling Dean, take that load of potatoes to Phoenix for me. And again, I was lucky enough to get to go along with him. One time, Annis and I were lucky enough to go on an RV trip with Dean and Marlene. We left Dean and Marlene's house in our motor homes and stopped. We left early that morning and stopped for breakfast at one of the favorite stops that they liked to stop at. We were on our way to Branson, Missouri. And we stopped, ate breakfast, and got back on the road and headed north towards Clinton, Arkansas. And as we got to Clinton, Arkansas, out of the left side, a guy in a pickup truck loaded with a load of barnwood run a stop sign, came across in front of a semi that was in the left turn lane stopped making the left turn, darted out in front of me, and we broadsided him, T-boned him. It totaled out our motorhome, and Dean was in front and heading down the road. Eventually, and not very long, a few minutes later, I saw Dean's motorhome coming back towards us, and he got out of his motorhome, come running towards me with his arms wide open and tears in his eyes. "Are you okay? Thank goodness you're okay." But you know, I didn't call Dean and say, "Hey, we've had an accident." I didn't need to. I knew I could count on my big brother. I knew he would be back. He had integrity and he had compassion. The year Dean graduated from high school, 1964, was the same year they were doing the World's Fair in New York City. And the LDS Church, as part of their pavilion, had Spire's replica of the Salt Lake Temple and set up kind of a visitor center with a narration done by Richard L. Evans. And Richard L. Evans was a member of the Quorum of the 12, but also did the spoken word during the Sunday morning broadcasts of the Salt Lake Tabernacle Choir. And I found this in a talk by Eldon Marvin J. Ashton where he referenced it. But I think that it is fitting here. Elder Evans, as part of his recorded presentation, said, "Life offers you two gifts. One is time, the other the freedom of choice. The freedom to buy with your time what you will. You are free to exchange your allotment of time for thrills. You may trade it for base desires. You may invest it in greed. Yours is the freedom to choose. But these are no bargains, for in them you find no lasting satisfaction. Every day, every hour, every minute of your mortal life on this earth must at some point be accounted for. And it is in this life that you walk by faith and prove yourself able to choose good over evil, right over wrong, enduring happiness over mere amusement, and your eternal reward will be according to your choosing." President Kimball, in a 1975 address, said, "I believe in goals, but I believe that individuals should set their own. Goals should always be made to the point that will make us reach and strain." Dean learned to set goals. He learned to set goals early. A goal to win at chess. A goal to win a race, whether against man or beast. Dean also set a goal in his life. When he was at University of Utah, Dean's goal was to graduate, to get his degree. That was of prime importance to him. But he also knew that he had a responsibility, his patriotism, that he needed to serve in the military. He set a goal and joined the ROTC. It wasn't out of fear of being drafted. It was a means of accomplishing two goals at the same time. After he graduated ROTC at the University of Utah is when he was accepted into pilot's training and then reported to Williams Field in Arizona to begin pilot's training. And thus the picture that I referred to on the back of the program a little while ago. Elder Ashton explained goal setting this way. In setting our own goals, we need to examine our needs and ability. The direction in which we are moving is more important than where we are at any given moment. Goal setting should cause us to stretch and make our way. Elder Ashton suggested that self-examination should precede that goal setting. He said self-examination is most difficult. Surveys have shown that most people take credit for success to themselves, but blame their failures on external forces or other people. It would be well then, when confronted with problems, to be able to ask the same question the 12 apostles asked during the Last Supper. And referring to Matthew in the Bible, he reads, Now when the even was come, we sat down with the 12. As they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? Elder Ashton continued, when our progress seems to be at a standstill, it is well for us to ask, who is at fault? Is it I? Am I sufficiently committed to righteous goals? Do I have the courage, fortitude, and wisdom to apply self-examination? Or will I be inclined to try and decide which of my associates is to blame for my failure? Dale Carnegie, a noted lecturer, said, if you are not in the process of becoming the person you want to be, you are automatically engaged in becoming the person you don't want to be. Elder Ashton continued, we must realize not all problems of life can be solved at once. A commitment to solve our daily needs and reaching of immediate lesser goals will bring meaningful success. Make use of your possibilities. It is wise and proper to make the most of every opportunity, but don't quit or weep because of failure or disappointment. Break down the commitments into smaller ones that you can handle. The journey of success is long and is dotted with a series of commitments to worthy goals. A person does not become committed to worthwhile goals just by making the declaration or decision. It must be a daily progression towards an established purpose. Dean related to me an experience he had when he was stationed in North Carolina. He was involved in a demonstration where Pope Air Force Base and Fort Bragg are side by side, Fort Bragg being a infantry base. And part of this demonstration, involved a low-level flight. Sorry, thank you. Part of this demonstration involved a low-level flight of the C-130 where they would do a drop of troops for deployment in the field out using the C-130 to do it. Dean was selected to do this demonstration. He was carrying the Army General's tank, and the design of the drop would be the C-130 would come in flying very low and slow, and a parachute would deploy out of the back of the C-130 with obviously the door down and open. The parachute would then drag the tank, which was on a skid, out of the back of the airplane, the parachute guiding the tank to the ground, and the tank would slide on the skid and stop in front of this grandstand full of Army and Air Force dignitaries that were there to evaluate this particular demonstration and deployment of troops. Dean was flying his C-130 low and slow. The loadmaster commenced the procedure to begin the drop. In the cockpit, Dean felt the tug of the parachute as it snagged onto the tank. The next part of the procedure was for the C-130 to then accelerate and begin an extremely steep climb to gain altitude, which is what they did. And as Dean began this very steep climb, he heard a bang and a clang and another jerk, because the tank had not been pulled out by the parachute, but had literally fallen out of the back of the airplane after the plane was several hundred feet in the air and had fallen to the ground. Dean said that when he landed, assuming that his military career was probably over at that point, he said he had never met so many brass, seen so much brass as was on the tarmac when they landed. A full investigation revealed that there had been a mechanical failure and the flight crew had done their job properly. It had torn part of the bulkhead out as the tank, literally, the gravity pulled that tank out of the C-130. It dropped the tank and it was busted. Dean showed me a picture that he wasn't supposed to have, that he had snuck in later that day and taken, where this tank was along a tree line, laying on its side with the turret busted off of it. But following the procedures, following the goal that he had set to do things by the book, as he was supposed to, saved his military career. I think that each of us have room for self-evaluation. I love my big brother. I love his integrity. I love the fact that he knew how to set goals and achieve them. And he wasn't afraid to take charge of his life through self-examination. And I think that each of us would be well served excuse me, if we did the same thing. I love my big brother. I will miss him. But I'll always be forever grateful for the example that he set for me. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Hi, I'm Golden. I'm Dean's oldest. And I gotta start off by saying thank you, Joe. part about what I've written about Dad was talking about how we didn't know him as much as we wanted to. And I'm going to talk about a lot of the things you talked about. So I feel like I knew him more than I thought. I'm the oldest, but Mom and Dad had 2 miscarriages before me. And I lived. And I've always felt golden because of him and how much they love me. It's something I try to show my kids. I try to make them feel the way that Dad made me feel. I wanted to be just like him. He was so smart. It was like he could do anything. I was amazed. I was constantly amazed at what he would do. One thing he did is, with the potato business, he put a walk-in cooler in our garage. I've never seen that before. As a kid, I'd love to go to work with him. That was the best days ever, was going to work with Dad. And would deliver potatoes. I remember going with Joe and Dad. He took me to Dick's Cafe and delivered potatoes. Dick gave me after dinner mints. And we would go to other restaurants, and we went up Cedar Canyon after dark to deliver potatoes. And I felt like a grown-up being out working with Dad and staying up after bedtime. One time when we were really small, I don't know if Ashley had been born yet, and that was June of 1976. So I would have 4, maybe 5. I wanted to go to work with Dad, and he said no. We lived just north of Grandma and Grandpa here in St. George, just south of the boulevard. And he had Grandma's car loaded with potatoes in the trunk, and he wouldn't let me go, and he left. I don't know if he had the front door locked or not. I couldn't get out of it. But the back door was only latched with a hook that I couldn't reach. But I asked Amanda for help, and we carried a chair from the dining room down the stairs to the back door. I got on it and unlatched the door and got out. I got on my tricycle and I followed Dad. So I got to the boulevard and I turned east and I could see Grandma's car, and I started pedaling. And he stopped at the light on Main Street and I started to catch up. And then it turned green and he was gone. And I didn't know where I was anymore. So I started crying and I sat there for I don't know how long, until a guy came out of the business and asked me what was wrong and who I was. And he brought me inside and made some calls. And then he took me upstairs, and I was at the old skating rink on the boulevard. I'd made it a block and a half from the house. And he took me up there to the concession stand, and he's like, you can pick 2 of anything here, anything you want. And it was the biggest decision I'd ever been handed at that time. I had to get the good candy. I didn't know what it was. I'd never picked my own candy. So I agonized over that for a while and picked something, and then we went downstairs. And I ate my candy and waited. And the police showed up, and they took me in a squad car to a station on Bluff Street, and they gave me donuts. I was like, this is a great day. And so I waited there, and a little while later, Dad came. He was there to pick me up. I don't know how he heard. We didn't have cell phones. Mom said there was an announcement on the radio. I don't know if he heard that. But he'd been on his way to Cedar City, and he was there. It was the greatest thing I've ever seen. When we got outside, he gave me the worst spanking I think I've ever gotten from him. I didn't understand why, but I think it's because losing a child was one of his greatest fears. More than once, he said that to me, when I saw the fear. One time when Amanda was in the hospital, he really cared about us. The potato plant was a special place to go with Dad. Like going to work, it was a lot of fun. I love the smell of the plant. I still do when I smell it. Anytime I was there, I would ask for a potato to eat. And sometimes he'd give us half a potato. And we'd go out on the dock and bite out the bottom half of the potato and pretend it was an igloo and play with it on the dock. And then we'd finish the potato. I don't think he saw us doing that because that was gross. One of the grown-up things that Dad did at the potato plant when I was there was weld. He wouldn't let me anywhere near it. And he told me not to look at the light, that it would burn my eyes and I would go blind. And I believed him. And so I didn't look, and I went away, and it was really hard to be patient. But then I grew up, and I still have good eyesight. And it's like he was looking out for me, and I really appreciate it. Another time at the plant, Amanda was with me, and we were playing in a box truck at the dock. I don't know what we were doing in the cab, but somehow we knocked the truck out of gear and it started rolling. I had no idea until Dad came bursting in to the truck, and he stopped it, and he was scared and nervous, and I didn't know it was moving. Amanda might have known because she remembers that, and Dad was her hero, and he saved us that day. I remember going camping with him, waking up in a tent on the shore of Lake Powell one morning. I don't know how we got there, but we were in a tent, and I loved going deer hunting, going to the camp and having the camper and Grandma and Grandpa. I couldn't wait until I was old enough to hunt. I thought my dad was pretty cool. He did a lot of things that other dads didn't do. He had an airplane, and it felt like we would go for airplane rides like other people went for Sunday drives. The first time he wasn't cool is when he test drove a Trans Am, because he didn't buy that car. He didn't like the sun shining on his bald spot, and so he had to get a car with a roof. I knew what the cool car was, but he didn't want a sunburn. I guess I can understand. One time at the plane, he flew us to Phoenix to see Joe, and I was the oldest, and I got to sit in the front seat, and the rest of the kids were in the back. Over the Grand Canyon, Dad announced that he needed to look at the map, and I needed to take the wheel. And I wasn't ready for that responsibility. And so I grabbed it, and I held still, and I sat there, and it seemed like forever. And then I was like, it's probably okay for me to breathe. So I started breathing. And I wanted to see what would happen if I turned the wheel or if I pushed or pulled. But I didn't dare, because I didn't want to make Dad mad. He had trusted me, and I wanted to show him that I earned it. As kids, we used to make fun of him during the pre-flight procedures with the plane. He would always lower the window and call clear before he started the engine to make sure nobody was outside working on the plane and got injured. And we would tease him, and it's like, there's nobody out there. We circled the plane. We've done everything. But every time, he called clear, and he made sure. And then we'd taxi out onto the runway and sit and wait while he went through checklists. But we always made it. He took us on trips to places that my friends' families weren't going. One of the first trips I can remember is going to Disneyland. I think Ashley was a baby. It was a time when you had to use tickets to go on the rides there. And there was little bumper cars, and that was my favorite ride. I don't know how many times he let me go on that ride, but I went on it a lot. And I got home and I dreamed about going back and driving those cars again. And maybe 5 or 6 years later, he took us to Disneyland again. And the first thing I did was run to those cars to drive the cars. And then I got there and found out there's a big giant track in the center, keeping the cars and steering them all through the route. And I had no idea. I was heartbroken that I didn't drive the car. It just steered me along. I still have a Mickey Mouse that he bought me on that trip. Probably one of his not so good ideas was he taught me to drive when I was 10 in the Philippines. I thought the accelerator only had one position, and that was on the floor. So I'd find a straight road and mash the gas and just hold on. And one time, that was too much for Dad, and he had to slide over and hit the brake, and he didn't let me drive much after that. But I had fun seeing how fast I could get going before it stopped me. We spent a week in Hawaii in a bungalow on the beach that was reserved for service members. And we played in the ocean and drove around Oahu, saw Pearl Harbor. We went to the Polynesian Cultural Center and didn't have a lot of fun there as kids. But we also went to a sea life park and saw dolphins for the first time. Probably the only time I've seen dolphins, because I haven't gone to SeaWorld. So it's something I'll always remember. When we visited him in Arkansas for the first years, maybe 2, we would get annual passes to the local water park. And it felt like every day after work, he would come home and load us up and take us to the water park and let us play. One of those years, he drove us back. We went through Texas, coming back to Utah, and we stopped at Six Flags over Texas. And I don't know how fast we got through all the rides we wanted to do there, but it seemed like it was pretty early in the day. And we ended up in a skee ball arcade, just rolling balls into the hoops. And I think we sat there until after dark, just hours and hours and hours of kids playing skee ball and Dad watching us play. And he never said it was time to stop. He just waited until we were done. It was a lot of fun. In the spring of 1983, Mom told us we were going to move to the Philippines. Her and Dad were trying to get back together. You know, for a kid from a divorced family, it was like your biggest dream come true. It didn't work out somehow, but I got to spend the summer with Dad. I didn't have to go back until school in the fall. Before Mom and the kids left, Dad came home from work one day and he said, "I'm going away. I have a secret mission. I can't tell you where I'm going or what I'm doing, but I'm going to be gone for a few days and then I'll be back." And I couldn't believe Dad had a secret mission. James Bond went on secret missions. I didn't know my dad did. And that was the mission you talked about, Joe, to Vietnam, to pick up the service members. So we were there for that, and when he got back, he was okay. And it was kind of stressful to worry about Dad being gone like that. When it was just me and Dad in the Philippines, we took advantage of, I think, every amenity that the base had to offer the service members. There was a trail system there, and they rented horses, and we would go horseback riding. Dad was in a bowling league, and he'd rent me a lane while he was playing, and I'd bowl. We'd go see every movie that came to the theater on base. You know, we'd go to the base exchange and they'd buy me comic books and model airplanes like what they were flying on the base. And we'd go home and put them together on the back porch. I think he did most of the putting together, but he'd let me paint them. We went to the Subic Bay Naval Base one time, and I played in the ocean. Dad sat on the beach and watched. And I was snorkeling in the surf, and I saw a dollar bill floating in the water. And so I swam out and I grabbed it. Just went back in and gave it to Dad and went back out in the water. And there was more money floating. And so I went and grabbed it and took it back and went back out. About the fourth trip, I was going out further each time. I saw a snake or an eel swimming through the water, and no, I was done. I think I jumped out of the water and then swam as fast as I could back to shore. And I got to Dad, and he was almost falling out of his chair laughing. He thought it was so funny. I don't know if I've ever seen him laugh so hard as he laughed at me that day. We'd go exploring on his motorcycle in the Philippines, and after a long day of riding, we were on our way back and a storm hit, and it started to rain really hard. I don't know where Dad had rain jackets, but he had them, and we were able to put them on and ride home for a couple of hours in the rain and stay dry. And I was just really impressed that Dad was prepared and had a jacket for me and him, and we stayed dry. There's another vacation spot called Baguio that the service members would go to, and they had a golf course. We went there for a golf tournament one time, and that's about the only thing I can remember him not letting me do, was he didn't let me golf in the tournament with him. But I was 10, and I'd never golfed before. I'm a horrible golfer now, so it's probably the right call. Dad's service overseas sent him to a lot of places, like Singapore, Thailand, Korea, Japan. He was the cheap electronics hookup for us. If you needed a boom box or a stereo or a computer, he would get it. He sent us a boom box as a kid, and so instead of letters, we would get cassette tapes from Dad. And so the kids would all huddle around the boom box and listen to a tape, and then we'd record our own and send it back to him. We would send him tracings of our feet, and then he would go to Korea and buy shoes our size and send them back. I was the first kid in school with a pair of Velcro shoes because he sent them to me. Problem was, it was a year early and nobody noticed, so I wasn't the cool kid. He bought Velcro wallets when that was a thing, and I think Jade and I had them forever. I don't know if you guys remember these, but I found one I still have. I was probably in my 30s before I quit using these wallets because he had so many of them. We also had Power Rangers coloring books years before the Power Rangers came to the States. Going through my keepsakes, looking for pictures of Dad. I found a bunch of letters and birthday cards from him. The first one was from my 11th birthday, November 1983, just a few months after I got back from the Philippines. He said they had just gotten back from Korea, and next week he was going to Japan. But then he talked about I'd ridden horses that year at deer camp with Grandpa. And I guess Grandpa told him about it because he said he'd heard I was a good horseman. I know the next time we'd see each other, we'd go riding. I'm pretty sure we did. I don't know how he kept up on us like that. Because the summer I stayed there, we could only make one phone call to my mom because the long distance charge was $13 a minute. In 1983, I just can't imagine what that would be today. And I didn't have anything important enough to talk to Mom about for $13 a minute. In March of '87, I asked him for money to buy a bike. I sent him a letter and said, I want to get a paper route and earn some money. I'm working hard in school. Can you do that? And he wrote back and he sent me money for a bike. And he talked about 8th grade science class. And he learned about magnets and electromagnetism. And he said when he was rewiring the potato plant, he remembered that class and he was able to take a motor from the junk pile and get it to turn backwards because of what he remembered from that class. The same year, for my birthday, his letter said there had been a rainstorm at the house in Arkansas. A tree had fallen over and hit the roof, and there was some damage. The estimate for that was only $150 to fix. Seems really low. He talked about the simulator and it being turned over to civilian contractors in the future. The simulator was one of the funnest things that we did as kids with Dad in Arkansas. The simulator ran 24 hours a day, so he would get time at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometime in the afternoon. It just varied on what was available and what he was assigned. So if you wanted to go to the simulator with Dad, you might be woken up at 1 o'clock and have to drive there in the dark and then wait in the back of the simulator while he trained. And then at the end of the session, if there was any time left, you'd have a little bit of time to fly. There wasn't much time, usually enough to take off, circle around, and try and land. I usually crashed. I always crashed. On one of the trips to the simulator with Dad, he was training a pair of pilots from Kuwait. And afterwards, they talked to me and asked me about my long hair and my high-top shoes and if that was the fashion here. And I was like, I don't know. It's just what everybody wears. But they were really nice, and it kind of brought it home when Iraq invaded them. And I was like, I met people from there, and they were nice, and I don't think that's right. And it was easy to support Desert Shield and Desert Storm because of that. Dad went to Saudi Arabia during Desert Shield for a few weeks. Luckily, he didn't have to be there for Desert Storm. I went to visit him in 1995. I got on the plane the day of the O.J. Simpson verdict. So I've got a copy of the USA Today that I took on the plane with O.J. not guilty. That upgraded the software in the simulator, and I got to fly a mission this time with attack helicopters escorting us. And it was the best video game I've ever played. It was great. This time, I was going to land the plane. I was going to use the instruments and the altimeter, and I was going to land right. Because it was still hard to judge the ground based on the video screens. And so I was making my approach. I was lined up on the runway. And this time I was going to do it. And then I crashed at 200 feet. And I was like, what happened, Dad? Why did I crash? I wasn't at zero. And he's like, the altimeter works from sea level, not ground level. So I ran the plane into the ground. Next time I'll get it. I have a letter from Dad from July of 1990. It was about my first car. The ball joints were out on it and needed to be fixed. And he gave me a list of maintenance items to check. And he's like, here's how to check your transmission fluid. Here's how to change your oil. Check your brakes. And then he said, check the rear axle and make sure it's got fluid. And I didn't. And the rear end of my car went out when it ran out of fluid. And somehow I managed to limp it into the parking lot across the street from Uncle George and Aunt Dale's, Cedar High School. And Dad happened to be visiting when it happened. So he had to spend at least a day with me going to the junkyard and tearing the rear end off another car, bringing it to the high school, stripping the brakes off of my car, tearing the old rear end off, putting it all back together, cussing at me the whole time. And I was happy to be with Dad. And it cracks me up because I tell my kids the same thing. We've only blown up one car. You know, on a different trip, he spent a day with me at work. You know, my first job was washing dishes at Dick's Cafe. And he came and spent the whole shift with me, just sitting and watching me work. It's like, I don't know how he had the patience, but he was there the whole time. Another time, I crashed that first car into a parked car in the parking lot, different parking lot of Cedar High School. Dad wrote me a letter to cheer me up and told me not to get depressed. He said there were days where he was discouraged and didn't feel like going to work, but not to let it get you down and keep going. I'd forgotten that until I reread the letter, and it was just really amazing to see that Dad got discouraged like that. He loved flying so much. I was really surprised. One of the last letters I have from Dad is him sending back signatures to co-sign on my second car. And I used that second car to move to Salt Lake and become an adult and live on my own. I'd asked him to help me get a four-wheel drive Toyota truck, but he said no. There would be too much maintenance and you shouldn't do that. You need to get a car. And so I did. I wasn't happy about it, but I think he was right. It would have been too much. The last letter I found from him, and I didn't go through everything, but it was my tax returns, and I'd sent them off to him. I'd forgotten he did it, and it was at least 6 years after I started working, so I don't know if I was sending my dad tax returns every year for 6 years. But if so, he's way more patient than me with my kids, because I did their taxes for a couple of years, and then I was like, you guys need to do this on your own. Here's how. He had a lot more patience for me than I do for mine, I guess. So when I was a teenager, we've already talked about Dad transferred from the Philippines to Little Rock, and that meant we could go and visit him in the summertime instead of waiting for him to be able to come to us. I don't remember how we got there the first time, but the first trip, all 4 kids went together. Dad and Marlene weren't married yet. They had separate houses. And I remember Jade and I were really, really upset to discover that Dad had better Transformers than us. He wouldn't let us take them either. And we tried. After that, I think it was too much for Dad and Marlene to have both of the kids together, or all 4 kids. So we got split up, 2 kids in one half of the summer, 2 kids in the other half. So usually Ashley and I would go together, and Jade and Amanda would go together. The second year, Grandma and Grandpa Holt drove us to Arkansas. Grandpa's driving scared me, so I tried to sleep all day long in the car. But they were really nice to me, and when we'd get to the hotel at night, they'd let me play the Nintendo. So I'd take the only TV in the hotel room and play video games. I don't know how they could do that after a long day on the road, but they did. Grandma was sick when they got to Arkansas, so they weren't able to stay as long as they planned. That summer, I got a letter from my best friend Crawford in Utah, and it was a video game tip about the Nintendo. We didn't have cell phones and text messages, and long distance was still expensive. So he wrote me a letter on how to play a video game. And he's been my best friend since 1984, when we moved into the house in Washington again. And we met because he was playing with the toys that Dad had bought me for my birthday that I'd left in the backyard. It's just, his grandfather gave me my first job at Dick's Cafe. I've worked with him at 4 other places, and he's gotten me 3 of those jobs. And it's just funny how small of a world thing it is. I actually had a story about our trips to Arkansas. Dad had soda in his house, and that was something we didn't have at home in Utah. And I think we all have sweet tooth. And so we drank way too much soda. When Dad saw what was happening, he was like, that's it. You guys can have one a day and no more. There's sugar-free Kool-Aid, and you can drink all of that you want, but the soda just one a day. Ashley wanted more. So she knew I was watching the garbage cans, trying to keep her honest. So she'd sneak them into the room and have a soda and then hide the cans underneath her bed. I don't know how I saw them in her room, but I guess I did when I told Dad. And he turned it into a life lesson about integrity. And it stuck with Ashley. You know, more than 30 years later, she remembers that talk and what he said to her. One thing I'll miss about Dad is hearing him say, Ashley! When she says something that made him, offended him, or just was a little off, but we always laughed. I know, but I remember Ashley. You know, I visited Dad one year for Christmas. It was probably 1989. I would have been 17. He was in Illinois, military area of command. So that was in Illinois, but he lived in St. Louis. It was just across the river. And it was a long drive from St. Louis to Little Rock. And it was just he and I together. And I can't remember specifics of what we talked about on that trip, but I know he talked to me about what it's like to be a teenager and how to deal with growing up. And he talked, you know, and I just was able to listen to him for a lot of time. On the way back from that trip, the fan belt in the van broke. And he was able to look at the gauges and say, something's wrong, we've got to stop. And we got to an auto parts store. You know, he had diagnosed a problem in the car. And he's like, we've got to go get a fan belt. And so we got to the auto parts store. He got out and said, yep, the belt's gone. Went in, bought a belt. Then he had to go buy a tool because they wouldn't loan one to him. So the whole time he was changing the belt, he was cussing at them for not loaning him a tool. And I was just impressed that he had been able to diagnose that just while we were driving. He got us to safety and fixed it. You know, another thing he did is on our first trip out to Arkansas, he drove us all home in the van. And it was a big van, multiple rows of seats in the back. And he decided to take out a couple seats, reverse one row, and he built a bed in the back. And he just came home from work one day and pulled out his notepad and started drawing up a plan. Then he went to the store and came back with lumber, and, you know, before dinner, he had a bed in the back. And the mattress was level with the car seat. And it's like, wow, how did you do that? I spend hours on YouTube trying to figure out how to do projects, and there was none of that for him. He just knew what to do. He also had a portable TV and VCR that we were able to put in the van and watch movies the whole way home. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know how he dealt with us on that trip back, because McDonald's had a really cool Happy Meal toy, And I think we asked for Happy Meals for every meal on that trip. Just every time. So now I'm going to go back to the trip to visit him in October 95. That was my last chance to see Dad before I was a dad. My first kid was due in December. And all we did was fish. Whenever he was home from work, we'd go fishing after work. On the weekend, we spent all day at the lake fishing. We didn't talk much, we just fished. But it was okay. I was happy to be there, and I think he was happy that I was there, and we just fished. I think the most excited I've ever seen him was on that trip. The bass started chasing bait fish, and the top of the water just started churning. Dad had multiple rods on his boat, so that depending on the situation, he could change rods, have a different bait, and start catching fish. So he was able to drop his rod, grab the right bait, start casting out, and he was catching fish. I had the wrong bait on my pole, so I had to get in the middle of the boat and start tying on a new bait. On one of the casts, his lure hooked me in the ear. And I was like, ow. And it was just really amazing to see the level of excitement he had and how quickly he was concerned and worried and sorry that, had accidentally hit me. And it was just an accident. When Dad retired, we all flew out to see him again. I didn't land the plane again in the simulator. Jade was in the back causing engine problems for me. Amanda scared Joe so bad, I think he thought we were going to die in a simulator because she stalled the plane. It was one of the funniest things I've seen. I needed a haircut, and so I went with Dad to get a haircut and meet the general that was coming to do the retirement ceremony. We went to meet the plane. I couldn't go out and meet them on the flight line because I'm a civilian. But I could go into the tower and sit at the door, and it was a glass door. They had a couch. So I sat on the couch, and I watched Dad walk out and meet the plane and talk to the general out there. And then they came back. And when Dad got to the door, he slammed it open, and he called attention, and I shot up and started to salute. And then I said, what am I doing? When I'm up, so I guess I have to stand here. And I waited for them to pass. Then I followed him into the conference room and stood at attention the whole time going, I don't know what to do. When Dad would come to visit here, we'd go out to eat all the time. We have a lot of memories of going to Pizza Factory, and we went to Denny's for breakfast. One of the last trips that he made out here, we were at Denny's for breakfast, and we were waiting to be seated. It takes a while for a big party. And Amanda cuddled up to Dad, and she was Daddy's girl. It was something I didn't know they had. To see how much she loved him and how much he loved her, and it was something I only recognized after having daughters of my own. And it was really nice to see. Visiting Dad when we found out he had the brain tumor was really hard. He was different. We didn't see the worst behavior that Marlene described, but there was definitely something that wasn't him. Seeing the scan of the tumor, It's hard to believe it wasn't worse. He would get sent to Walmart on an errand and be gone for hours and come back without what he was sent to get. And he would just say, I got there and I sat in the parking lot and watched people and then came home. It was, actually, I saw him in the ICU after the surgery. And I was able to leave because Dad was okay. He looked at us and he knew us. And it was going to be okay. But then there were complications after they took him out of the ICU, and he didn't never recover from it. Ashley said he always recognized her every time she saw him. And I felt the same way. The last time I saw Dad, I wanted him to be my wife. So I took Amber out and Ashley took Bill. I already knew that I'd found a great partner. But watching Ashley and Bill and Amber take care of Dad, but I felt so much better about her and Bill. It was really special to see you guys help him out. Dad always made me feel loved. Amanda asked me to read these words for her. I don't think I agree with them 100%, but she would like me to read them. When I was 3 or 4, I remember waiting for my dad to get home. On many nights, but usually I would fall asleep waiting. And I would wake as he was carrying my sleepy body up the stairs to tuck me into my bed. I remember his gentle embrace as I dangled in his arms. It was a blissful feeling of complete comfort and trust. It was a feeling of love and being loved. It's difficult to reconcile the contrast between my love and attachment for him with the way things played out during his absence in the years that followed. At age 4, he was gone, and that was the greatest loss of my life. It shaped so much of who I am and continue to struggle with to this day. And with my grief that I've worked through to this point, I find it most helpful to see him as a loving and sensitive boy who was confused and needed love himself. We all have to admit that the brain tumor had an influence on the decisions he made, and I believe that he did love his family. I believe that we would have had a dad. Otherwise, I believe that we would have had a dad otherwise. I believe that things came so very close to being different, with all the confusing absence in times that we needed him and he wasn't there. What I hope to give my sister and brothers is the understanding of the truth of his love that I felt in his arms as he carried me upstairs to my bed at the age of 4. I remember those times too. I remember coming home from Grandma and Grandpa's car in the back of Grandma and Grandpa's house, being in the back of the car, falling asleep. I remember waking up when we got home and pretending to still be asleep, hoping that Mom or Dad would carry me to bed. Reading that reminded me of one more story about Dad. And that was, I got a set of Legos one year for Christmas. And he liked puzzles. He had like a 3-dimensional AT&T wooden puzzle that he would put together, and we had others in the house. But that year when I got the Legos, he wouldn't let me play with it. He opened it up and he played with them and built something for hours before I could. And I remember that when I have a grandson now. The other day I was in Costco looking at Legos, thinking about when I'm going to buy them and not let him play with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Colton. I'd like to ask everyone to please rise. We'll have the pallbearers wait in the lobby, and we can follow the family out. There's more people waiting to what? Okay. I'll show it to you.